Today we're going to have our spider senses tingling as we have a look at the NECA Toys Spider-Man Homecoming 1/4 scale Spider-Man figure. Spider-Man here features attachable web shooting effects, 35 points of articulation, and he's wall mountable as well. So the proof is in the pudding. I love that saying. Proof is in the pudding. Let's figure out how tall Spider-Man actually is. A 1/4 scale Spider-Man stands at 17 inches in height. And though we don't have necessarily a superhero figure to compare him to, here he is next to a regular 7-inch Predator figure also from NECA. You can see that he doesn't even clear the top of Spider-Man's legs. Why don't we start with the head? That seems to be the best place to go to when it comes to a figure. The head sculpt is fantastic. NECA really has captured the likeness here of Spider-Man from the Spider-Man Homecoming film, and I guess as well that would also count in the Captain America Civil War, in which Spider-Man first made his appearance. The head, though, the head sculpt has some really nice and actual texturing that they've added to the plastic itself, giving it a almost somewhat basketball. Best comparison I could make is a basketball, sort of texturing. He does have his webbing, which has been painted in. I have to admit that the webbing, the actual slots here, are not the most cleanest of paint applications. It looks like it just ran through there quickly with paint just filling in those areas. But there are a lot of areas where you'll see that it misses its mark slightly, and it gets kind of past the point of the little, the actual webbing detail here. Don't be alarmed, I've gone ahead and taken Spider-Man's head off just because it's a lot easier to get a look at it versus me trying to zoom in with my camera. A 17-inch tall figure, it's pretty difficult, let me tell you, to try to get filmed. Again, you've got some fantastic texturing, except for the fact that, again, the webbing gets a little messy in some of the areas. Otherwise, I'm pretty happy with the result here. They've even sculpted in the slight indication here of an ear. The nose also there covered in as well. If you also want to go the route of an interchangeable head, NECA also includes this one right here as well. I have to be completely honest, though, I'm rather disappointed with the removable or somewhat removable mask as a substitute for this one here. By no means will I ever consider going to the route of this one. I would normally appreciate the fact that NECA would have included a secondary head sculpt, but I don't find it looks anything like Tom Holland. I mean, the lower face almost is more reminiscent of like Tobey Maguire. I don't feel it actually looks like him at all. He's a very chiseled looking lower face sculpt, and the paint that they've gone in and done on the areas in between, well, the area running down from his nostrils, they've added this weird red, which ultimately makes it kind of look like he's bleeding from the nose than anything else. He's heavily bruised up here. He's got some little bruises on the side. It could stand to reason that we're supposed to look at this more as a battle-damaged Spider-Man. Maybe that is blood running out from his nostrils. I don't think that is the intent of what they had planned, but he's got all this excessive amounts of slight bruising to his skin. I appreciate the fact that the mask is pulled up, and it's nice detailing here in which the mask has been pulled up over the bridge of the nose and around the side here where it starts developing creases. But I have to admit though, the mask is, or this head sculpt with the mask up, is somewhat disappointing. One thing you can also do with the heads is you can swap out and that's why I've got my screwdriver here, you can swap out the eyes. I find it's a little tricky to get in there with your fingernails, so that's why I grab a trusty screwdriver. It's just enough to kind of get in there, get at least the starting point happening. Once you kind of wedge in between those eyes, you'll find that the eye does pop out. It's pegged by 3 individual pegs, so there's really a lot keeping it in place here. We'll go ahead and do the same on the other side. Again, just trying to find an area where you think you can get a screwdriver in there. The last thing you definitely want to be doing is causing any bit of damage to the eye, so be very careful here. And just pry away the eyeball here, or the eye patch at the very least. And that's one side done. We'll go ahead and do it on the other side here for Spider-Man's defaulted mask. To show you how those eyes vary from one another, I kept this one, the defaulted one on this head sculpt, and I simply just swapped out the other so you can see the difference between the two. It's really entirely up to you how you want to have it displayed. You could theoretically have one slightly open, one a little bit more open, or you can completely mix it all out completely and just have these slit eyes instead. Either way, it's nice that you would have this as a swappable option. I have to admit though that the pegs attaching it to the head can be a little bit difficult to access unless you have something, say, like a screwdriver. Swapping out the heads, by the way, are extremely easy. You're pulling it actually from the neck rather than the top of the head. And we'll go ahead and replace it with the unmasked or slightly unmasked Peter Parker head. Popping that into place. And there's what it looks like with the defaulted head. I don't know. I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling it at all, actually. The head sculpt, I don't know if maybe they just didn't have licensing to use Tom Holland's face, but it really doesn't look anything like him. Now, before we resume with the rest of looking at Spider-Man here, of course, some of the other accessories he comes included with a series of interchangeable hands. Currently, in the sockets, he's got a pair of relaxed hands. That's what I've just got him displayed with at the moment, but he, of course, has some web shooting hands. No Spider-Man would be complete without a pair of web shooting hands. He also has a pair of web holding hands for him if you wanted to have him displayed with the webs swinging. I'll show you those webs in a second. He also has a pair of closed fists, defaulted. Nothing too exciting about a pair of closed fists, especially on the wall crawler. And then he's got a series of interchangeable hands, which I have to kind of correct myself here. I said that I changed them out to slightly relaxed hands. The hands that currently are in the socket are basically one of each of these. So he does have a pair of wide spread hands, almost as if you want to have him clinging to the wall. And then he has a pair of relaxed palms as well. He gets these, which are a pair of, well, not quite an identical pair, but a pair nonetheless of the web extended strands, like the actual web shot out from his web shooters. They are frayed on the end, and what I can only describe as, they feel almost as if like they're made out of, dare I almost say this, paper. They feel like they've almost been painted, or it almost feels almost like a sprig of straw or like a blade of grass. And it just feels like it's been painted over top of it. The term fragile would be extremely, would be easy to use in this extreme case. I thought they would be wireframed, but I don't know. They seem as if perhaps there could be a little bit of flexibility to these. I dare not entertain the idea of bending these because I've noticed they don't seem to have like a bounce back. In fact, when I am bending it, it looks like it's starting to create a stress mark in those strands. So I don't think you can actually bend them. I don't think that they are wireframed. If they are, doesn't look as if you can actually bend them though. Let me just show you here. Maybe, but at the risk of wimping out on here, I do think that I'm not going to try to bend these. It does seem like there's not going to be a lot of give happening here. The web strings more than can fit through the hands of Spiderman. In fact, I almost feel as if the hands could have been a little bit more closed. The hole is way too big to accommodate the very skinny straw-like web shooting, the web shot that's coming out here. I guess they do it slightly, so if you wanted to tip it on an angle, you could accomplish that. There's a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more give, I suppose, in having a larger hole. But it just doesn't seem like it sits all that well. It sits a little on the loose side. I guess if this is the goal you're seeking, I guess it's a successful goal, displaying it, you know, despite for the fact that the hole is a little on the loose side here. And as well, if in case you're wondering, the web shooters, which I believe are upside down, has a little hole in which you can slot in those shooting webs. It's a very, very tight fit, but at the very least, you at least get it in there, and it's not as loose as the fists that are holding the strands in place. As for Spider-Man's costume, I feel it's a faithful recreation of how it appears in the movie, of course, just of a larger scale. It does sadden me that companies like NECA, who churn out such amazing products, have to at times be relegated to release these guys in a quarter scale and not so much a 7-inch variety. You may be fine with the idea of a quarter scale figure, and I am for the most part, but comparing the two, I mean, I certainly would appreciate the more user-friendly end of being able to display a 7-inch variety version of Spider-Man and rather not the big 1/4 scale. I've also dubbed the quarter scale figures skin pinchers, as I found myself repeatedly pinching my skin. There's an injury wound right there, of just bending the elbows and especially moving the knees here. I felt my fingers getting caught in here a couple of times when I was bending the knee joints and the elbow joints here. We'll talk about that in a second. Detailing on Spider-Man here for a quarter scale variety is actually pretty good. All the areas in which that are black are raised from the rest of his outfit. It's not simply a case where they just painted the black on there. The spider emblem is also raised here, and can be said for the backside there as well, where it's got this big, very nicely impressed spider logo there. Again, you've got the texturing happening on his costume, which seems slightly varied here on the blue versus the red up at the top here. The red's a little bit on a smoother end of that texturing. The blue is a little on the coarser side. Probably wondering what that is. We'll talk about that in a second. Panel lining, I think for the most part, is pretty good, pretty clean. All the lining added to his suit is raised and rather not painted. Again, I like that. His spider boots, as well as his undersoles, all painted in. It's funny, though, that he does have peg holes on the undersides of his feet, yet I've yet to find a display stand from NECA that fits this. If, in fact, here, I just so happen to have one right here, it fits in there, but it fits loose. It doesn't securely attach to the undersides of his feet. So even though he does have peg holes on the undersides of his feet, he really isn't the easiest of figures to find a stand for. A stand would be very well appreciated here, because I do find Spider-Man topples over a lot. The beginning of this review, as I normally try to do, I do turnarounds in different ways you can pose him. My struggling to get this guy posed, as he fell over frequently. He really just does not have the proper means, coupled for the fact that he's also got very smooth feet, doesn't have a peg stand to stand him on. I was also relegated just using clips, one of which seems to be the go-to, it seems, for these larger figures, is the stand, I believe that came with the Xenomorph dog. I made use of that quite frequently, and very frustratingly, I tried to get Spider-Man displayed at the beginning of this review here. As for that little plug on the back, what you can also do too is you can take this plug off. There we go. And you can mount Spider-Man, if you can believe it, on a wall. If you have, for example, a nail or a thumbtack, probably I would imagine for the size and the weight of Spider-Man, you may want something a little bit more stable to the wall rather than just a thumbtack that you're pushing in. But there's this little hole slot here where you can basically mount Spider-Man to the wall. And of course, you're probably not just going to have him dangling here. yeah, you know, you're going to want to compensate by having his legs slightly bent, and you know, you could have his hands kind of bent back, so almost as if Spider-Man's clinging to the wall itself and then attaching it to the nail there. Spider-Man Homecoming has 35 points of articulation. Let's go ahead and run through that together. He does have not only one ball joint, so this head rotates all on its own, and you got the hinge back and forth, but then you've got a very generous secondary ball joint in the neck. So a hinge here and a hinge here, giving you 2 ball joints. The shoulders hinge outward. You may experience over the course of moving things on Spider-Man creaks, squeaks, and clicks as you are moving the arms outward here. The arms rotate all the way around. He's got a swivel on the bicep, top cut bicep, right attaching to the shoulder area here. And then he's got skin pinching joint number 1, a double hinge on the elbow. Be very careful when you are moving the elbow back. You don't accidentally get any of your fingers in there. Ouchie, ouchie, ouchie. That hurt quite a bit. Hands rotate all the way around, and you've got the hinge happening back and forth there. He also gets a very generous ab crunch. I would want to say he's got a waist swivel. It seems as if it's more of a ball joint than anything else, and even on top of that, yeah, you really can't rotate it that much back and forth. You can rock it up and down, but the back and forth motion, not so much. If you ask me, Spider-Man's more frustrating joints rely or sit in the end of the legs. He does have a forward and back on the legs. The legs split out. A lot of times I found myself kind of catching my hand in there trying to move it, but the biggest culprit was the knees. The knees have a hinge, and the knee has the secondary hinge, which is very difficult to access. There we go. I do want to mention, though, that when you are moving the knee back, you might want to pay attention to this area here. You'll start seeing, maybe it's not going to be doing it here, you start seeing a little bit of a stress mark developing right there. It doesn't seem like it's permanent, at least for the dozen or so times that I've done this. I don't know long term if it's going to start fraying or getting a shade lighter here in the plastic as you are moving the knee back and forth. It does seem like it starts developing maybe the slightest of stress marks there, so just FYI. As for the feet, let's grab the figure here. The foot does have an ankle pivot, and you can also rock the feet back and forth. They don't seem to rotate. So if ankle pivot and a rock back and forth is all you really need for foot articulation, you have that. And last but certainly not least, he does have the hinge also in the foot. One thing I did find, minding my fingers while I'm saying this, one thing I did find though is because Spider-Man has relatively smooth feet, he is very difficult to stand. And one of the things I also noticed too, that the joint here on Spider-Man's knee, if I was to say bend his leg back, which I did at the beginning of this review, he doesn't, once it gets to past that locking point, it gets very loose. Just potentially it's just on my figure, it may not be everybody's, but I did notice it got a little loose and Spider-Man just simply couldn't hold his weight, which is all the more reasoning why I had to use the display stands or whatever stands I could really find to get the wall crawler to at least not topple over. Easier said than done. For the pros of owning a 1/4 scale Spider-Man, those same pros can somehow end up being also its cons. Sure, on paper it sounds great to have a 1/4 scale Spider-Man, especially for one that can be mounted to the wall. You can come into your room every single day and be greeted by the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that's attached to your wall. So that sounds pretty cool, and I have to admit that that feature is pretty neat. However, and one of my ongoing problems with reviewing 1/4 scale figures is that they're big, they're bulky, and the same posability that would be benefiting a 7-inch figure gets increasingly more aggravating when trying to move the bigger and bulkier joints on a 1/4 scale figure. The details, on the other hand, look good on Spider-Man. Paint is a little questionable when it comes to the web areas, but for the most part, I think NECA delivers a well-executed, well-produced Spider-Man figure. It's just a real shame that I couldn't have gotten this figure in a 7-inch variety. If they only had scaled this down, I would think this would be a perfect Spider-Man. ultimately by keeping it in its 1/4 scale means again you're going to have some big bulky problems when trying to move joints. Watch those fingers. And of course you're going to have a figure that from time to time, and it's happened at least a dozen or so times during this review, the figure may fall over. And he just doesn't accommodate, I think, getting him into as many Spider-Man poses as you think you could probably get with a figure that's got 35 points of articulation. Ultimately, unless you have a lot of supports, you probably will notice one at the bottom of his foot currently, unless you've got a lot of supports keeping Spider-Man up, he's probably going to fall over quite frequently because, again, and I have to reiterate this, he's a 1/4 scale figure. So mileage may vary and opinions may vary when it comes to the 1/4 scale figures. I'm personally still on the fence when it comes to some of them. Lankier, thinner characters like Spider-Man can be really difficult to get properly to stand. Also, of course, you have to factor in that 1/4 scale figures can take up a lot more space than a 7-inch variety. I know there's collectors on the market out there now that are scoping out and picking up 1/4 scale figures because they do like the big nature of NECA's releases. I'm still on the fence. I know there's some of them that I really have enjoyed. Spider-Man I do enjoy for the most part, but he is a bit big, he is a bit clunky, and he is very hard to stand. Keep that in mind. Today we were having a look at the NECA Toys Spider-Man Homecoming. This was the 1/4 scale Spidey. More Spider-Man. If you guys want to go back and have a look at some of my other 1/4 scale figure reviews from NECA, there's a playlist designated just for that. If you want to just fancy checking out all the NECA reviews, there's also a playlist there for you as well. Make sure as well at the very end of this video, which is coming up very soon, that you head over to my main page and check down the videos section. Sure, of course, I can keep recommending that you hit that bell notification, but it seems that that doesn't always work either. Your best bet is heading to the main page and scrolling down the videos section, see if there's any videos that you may have missed along the way. That way you're guaranteed to catch every single thing that I'm posting onto YouTube. As always, guys, thanks for watching as you always do. We're going to maybe do some more of these 1/4 scale figure. I know it does sound like on paper I'm really bashing the 1/4 scale figures. I'm really not. This is an awesome release from NECA. I really just like 7-inch figures instead. I think they're a little bit smaller and they can take up a lot less space. Anyways, guys, interested in hearing your thoughts down below. More videos will be coming your way. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.